on?
Here.
And Chair's here, Mr. King is absent. Oh, Ms. Murphy also. Minutes, give each of you a moment to look at the minutes for the June 8th. With some comments, questions?
Rather practice. I'll make a motion to approve the June 8th meeting as is.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. The minutes for June 8th are approved as is. Disclosure, any planning board members have any potential conflicts before the planning board this evening? No? Disclosure and notice. Any planning board members need to disclose any ex parte communications about contested or material adjudicatory facts or opinions concerning the merits of any application before the board this evening. No? Okay, our voting members this evening, Mr. King, now would be Dr. Noy, Dr. Roberts, Mr. Menard, Mr. Porter, and myself. Okay. So, first on the agenda, and perhaps only the only thing on the agenda, amendment to the town's zoning ordinance, section 6.19, Water Supply Protection Overlay District. The applicant is the Smithfield Water Supply Review Committee. Zoning ordinance amendment, corresponding map attachment. Those are all available to people if needed. Would you like to give a summary of that, Mr. Curl?
Mr. Chairman, the North Smithfield Town Council appointed a committee to look at the water supply protection overlay district with regard to commercial properties and re-examining certain elements of the zoning ordinance to see if they could create additional protections and review for projects going before the zoning board. Some time ago, there was an ordinance amendment with regard to the district that exempted certain commercial properties. I guess there was concern with the town council and that those properties could be adversely affecting or would need an extra layer of review prior to implementing any changes or expansion. So they appointed the committee. The committee's come back with these recommendations to the ordinance. Some of them are house cleaning measures and clarifications, and some have to do with changing in process and procedure, and then others are additions and amendments for the requirements of the special use permit.
All right. Who would like to start? Red line items that help us. A lot of the red line items are more grammatical.
Yeah, so I had gone through this over the weekend. I forwarded my comments to the Mark, and there was just a couple of clarifications, housekeeping things that I thought we could probably either define further, such as, on line 183, we reference RIDM groundwater quality rules. If there was, I know Mark has gotten me in the habit of thinking if there's any specific documents that we need to reference, because those documents and amendments tend to get updated from time to time. So if there was any particular ones that we need to add in. One of the areas of concern that I did have was under section 6.19.8.3, which is on line 383, just on the time frame of review for Conservation Commission, Planning Board, and other town personnel and boards and agencies that the zoning board may request review of. I had heard a couple times that the Conservation Commission had not had enough time to properly vet some of the applications that were before the planning board. So I didn't know if, keeping those 45 days would be more appropriate, just in the event that, the Conservation Commission meets, on Wednesday, and then the zoning board meets the following day, and then, Conservation doesn't meet till another, right at the end, another month away or something. So that was just one concern that I had.
So in response to that concern, the 30 days is statutory.
Okay.
According to Rhode Island General Law, I think when an earlier version of the amendments came back to me, I actually went through to look to make sure that all of the time periods met the statutory requirements. It used to be 45 days several years ago, and in the interim, the General Assembly changed that to 30 days. So that meets the statutory requirement in that particular case.
Perfect, then you can strike that comment. Let's see.
The other one was the definition. Right?
The definition, yeah, there was some cleanups with that. No, I didn't think we need to say, groundwater means water fountain. We could just say water fountain underground, just to match the consistency of the other definitions that are already in place.
I think the only other one I noticed would be the one that you asked for, suggest get clarification from the solicitor.
Yes.
Just because how punctuation can change, the object of verbs and things like that.
Exactly. So that was just the wording on,
One for man-made materials.
right, so at line 120, natural fill, the way it's worded, natural uncontaminated sand, soil, and general particles without any other materials, including those which are man-made. So are we including the man-made materials, or are we excluding them? So that's just, again, that's why I pointed to the solicitor, just because I know as recently with it came to mind the instance in Maine with Garlic Farms where there was a comma missing, and there was that litigation that they had. So even if we need to add a comma or a semicolon somewhere just to clarify that we actually mean that man-made is excluded from the natural fill, just looking to get some feedback on that. Refresh myself on my notes here. On line 345, I know we tend to look for things that are not described as subjective. It says does not contain adequate data. I'm just looking, this could be another thing for the solicitor to weigh in on. Adequate could mean something very subjective to one person as opposed to someone else. So just looking to quantify that terminology there. And then in relation to that section 619 8.1 with the whole technical assistance, typically how it runs is that the planning board has to make a positive or negative recommendation to the zoning board. So I'm wondering if the planning board should have the technical assistance material, or at least the professional licensed geologist, hydrologist, or soil scientists to be able to review the application at the planning board stage. Just because how can we make a positive or negative recommendation if we're looking at something in this this overlay district without that information? So I would hate to have it, go to zoning, then zoning has to send it back to us with the information saying, hey, we have this in front of us, can you make a positive recommendation one way or the other? So I didn't know if there would be some terminology to include that in one of the planning board, I know preliminary is pretty early on in the process, so maybe if it's included in the master plan process, that we, as the planning board, get that information so we can review it too. Mark, I don't know what your thoughts would be on
Yeah,
that.
I'm looking at that right now. So my initial assumption is that whatever information and whatever requirements need to go to the zoning board are required to be submitted at the time of the application. So then they would also come to the planning board. And we had a very lengthy discussion about this, about at what stage the consultant would be engaged to bring that in and how that process would work. And that normally what would happen is the zoning board would make its own determination whether it needed additional information. But I think the language here has altered that because it says rather than may engage, it says shall engage. So up front, as a measure, applicants would be informed that there will be an additional consultant required to review. And when that review is done, that material should come to the planning board as part of the submission package.
Would the planning board have access to that expert to come in, that essentially peer review? So that if we had any questions for that engineer, that they would be present at, we could request their presence at one of our meetings?
I typically, when it's a peer review, it's a written review and a memo to a board
Yep.
reviewing the material. So normally what would happen is that would accompany it, the material coming in. And if the board desired to have the engineer come in for testimony, we would have to in advance notify them. So two things could happen is the board could ask me to ask them in advance to come, or if it's at a meeting and you're uncomfortable, you would have to continue the meeting and then have them come to a subsequent meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Crowe, with the upcoming changes though, for the stages for planning and zoning responsibilities, I'm of mind to write this for, if that's cast in concrete, then I'm of mind that this be written to support that, rather than the way it is today, because it changed in 2 months.
There was some discussion about that, and I think there was determination made to try not to complicate the issue at this point, and that the board had done a substantial amount of work to date, and to bring that information before the council for consideration. And then if there are any changes that would be necessary as we're going through the rewrite to make those changes in this document. One of the changes is in zoning codes with regard to special use permits, that if there is not specific criteria required for specially permitted use, then it becomes allowed by right. Well, this whole section is special criteria, so it's exempted from that. That's really the one that I was concerned about. I don't think there are, at least at this point, to my knowledge and reviewing the changes 2 or 3 times, to be honest with you, that there's much that would require to be changed here.
But there's something you're also saying, go forward with it as it is.
Yes.
And we can always bring it back to the Water Supply Committee to.
Well, yeah, so what would happen is, as we were going through the review and rewrite of zoning and subdivision regulations, this will have already been enacted, and that's going to come under that umbrella of the review, so
Right.
any changes that may have been overlooked, we'll implement them at that time. There's nothing so extreme that it would change this drastically.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, so I have 2 other notes, and this is mostly in regards to fees and penalties. So this is when we get to line 424 and 432. While this, hazardous materials reporting plan shall be submitted annually to the local municipality, how can we ensure that can, if there's one group that decides not to submit that annually, what's the course of action? How do we remedy that to make sure that we are getting that annually?
So that's a staffing housekeeping measure, to be quite honest with you. So if someone is issued a special use permit and that special use permit has conditions attached to it, then that is a zoning requirement. And like any other zoning requirement, anyone who is in violation of that is subject to violation under the zoning ordinance, as well as subject to the penalties in the zoning ordinance. Typically, and I don't know ours verbatim, but it's usually $500 a day for every day of a tree violation. That's standard throughout the state. I assume it's the same in the North Smithfield zoning ordinance. So if someone was not to submit a report, it's really up to the reporting agency, whether that be the planning office or the building department, to keep a file as to when those reports are supposed to come in, or the DPW, I don't know. And if a report doesn't come in, then you reach out to the applicant and say, hey, where's your report? If it doesn't come in, and they don't comply, then they're subject to the notice of violation.
So then I guess that brings me down to the last part in the violations. One of the things that I was thinking of is, okay, well, it's great that we have to notify that they're in violation for 48 hours, but if they have leaking chemicals in this district down into the groundwater, and they're notified of it, but they don't react to it, and they continue to let chemicals leak or not start any cleanup, what happens? Can we as a town enact the cleanup and then place a lien on them, or send them a bill, or,
No. That's it. So, any violation of the zoning code that isn't adhered to will either become a violation that gets addressed in municipal court or in the Round Superior Court. The town cannot take an action on a property owner that would be punitive unless there's a court order, whether it be the municipal court or it be the Superior Court. So, regardless of what you wrote in there, if you were to say we can establish fines if you want to clean their property, that would be a violation of state law. So there's a whole, it can become frustrating and upsetting to people, but there's a whole statutory requirement for notice and response, and you have to go through that process, and you have to keep records, and you have to bring it to a judge, and the judge has to order something.
okay. No, it was more that, not saying that this is going to be true of our town, but if there's someone that comes in and something happens and they just decide, no, you know what, whatever, it's not, I'm going to be moving out of here in a month, and
Or even if it's not, if the ROI at $500 a day says keep letting it out.
yeah.
It could even be an abandoned property, taking action on abandoned
Yeah,
property.
true. Yeah.
And, the property owner's not there, so it's not responsive. So it could be any number of
Yeah.
situations, but there is a procedure that needs to be followed. It's beyond zoning.
That's good. Good to know. Just because, just want to protect what we can, and obviously follow the process as well. That was both of my comments.
This is going to apply to all these industrial commercial buildings, correct, as shown on the map. Now, any of these businesses exempt until the property, if I read it correctly, if the property changes hands or they wish to expand, only then do they have to conform to these regulations. Did I read that correctly?
So anytime you make an amendment to the zoning code, anything that's pre-existing is, the term people use is grandfather. It's called pre-existing non-conforming. And that the trigger for implementing any new regulations is a change to the existing conditions. So any addition, expansion, anything like that would have to go to the zoning board, get a special use permit, and at that point it would come under the regulations. If something is pre-existing and wasn't required to do certain things at the time that it was established, it's allowed to continue in that condition in perpetuity until there's a change.
Next question. If someone has already applied for, say, an expansion, are they exempt
Yes.
if they're already before the board?
Yes, it's called vesting. So if someone has submitted a complete application, that application has been accepted, paid certain, they have a letter of a complete application, or if they're in the process, they are already vested. So any new regulations that come into effect are not retroactive and cannot go back against that applicant.
And my last one is a misspelling. I think you throw these in on purpose to see who reads these. Line 440. Paragraph discusses drilling and so forth. I think Boeings, B-O-E-I-G-S, should be borings.
Well, I have stock in Boeing. You are correct. Thank you, Dr. Benoit. You found the golden egg.
There aren't any other comments. We do have members of the Board of Select, including the chair, as the applicant. So I don't know if there's anything you want to address before the board.
Dr. Soja, Chair of the Water Supply Review Commission. And so, just really wanted to summarize kind of some of the points that I heard this evening. And yes, the committee looked at the ordinance, looked at the changes, and didn't want it to be seen as punitive. Didn't want it to seem as restrictive to the point where it wasn't allowing new business to come in. The group is very conscientious of that balance between preservation and also bringing in new commercial development opportunities, specifically with the industrial and the manufacturing zones. And where it really felt that it could be applied to special use permitting was on those high land use intensity type projects. And that's where it kind of focused on the criteria. You'll notice in the document that it mentions a lot of EPA or